I never believed in those near-death experience stories. I always thought they were inventions, delusions of people seeking attention. But what happened to me was real, and it changed my life forever. My name is Stephany. I was born and raised in Guatemala, and until I was 34, I was absolutely sure of who I was. I've always been practical, independent, and tough. Since childhood, I learned that depending on someone was a mistake. I grew up watching my mother suffer because of my father's abandonment. She always said, "Men are no good," and those words were etched into me as an absolute truth. At 16, I realized I wasn't attracted to boys. Girls interested me more. I had my first girlfriends, and over time, I accepted that this was my identity. I never wanted a man to be part of my life, not out of hatred, but because I saw no need. If something broke at home, I fixed it. If I needed to carry something heavy, I carried it. If a light bulb burned out, I replaced it myself. And it was exactly this independence that led to my death that night. I was home alone as usual. The porch light had burned out, and without a second thought, I grabbed the ladder to replace it. It wasn't difficult. I'd done it countless times before. But that day something went wrong. As I reached to screw in the new bulb, I felt a slight imbalance. My foot slipped and everything became a blur. The last thing I remember was the impact. A sharp pain, a ringing in my ears, and then silence. My neighbor Carlos heard the crash and rushed to my house. He found me unconscious, unresponsive, and rushed me to the hospital. They later told me I arrived still alive. But shortly after being admitted, my heart stopped for exactly 8 minutes. I was clinically dead. What happened during those 8 minutes was something my mind could never have imagined. Something that challenged everything I believed. I left my body. I saw the hospital, the doctors trying to revive me, but I wasn't there. And then something happened. Something that would change my life forever. At first, I didn't know I was dead. It felt like a strange dream. One moment, I felt the pain of the fall, the impact against the ground, the distant sound of my neighbor shouting my name, and then silence. Absolute silence. Suddenly, I was in the same place where I had fallen. But something was different. There was a lightness I can't describe. No pain, no weight, no fear. I stood up instinctively, effortlessly, but when I looked down, my body was still there. The image hit me like a punch to the stomach. I was lying on the porch floor, motionless, pale, eyes half open, lifeless. My first reaction was to scream for help, but no sound came out. I wasn't even breathing. Panic set in. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible. I tried to touch my own arm, but my fingers passed right through it, as if I were made of mist. Desperation took over. What was happening to me? I heard hurried footsteps, and seconds later, my neighbor Carlos appeared. I saw his expression change instantly. He knelt beside me, shook my shoulder, and called my name. "Stephany, can you hear me? Stephany!" I was right there, but he couldn't see me. I started running through the house, trying to process everything. And then I noticed something even more terrifying. I wasn't stepping on the ground. I was gliding through the space. There was no friction, no weight, no limits. It was as if gravity didn't exist for me. And then, without warning, I was pulled upward. The house disappeared, and everything around me turned dark. But it wasn't an ordinary darkness. It wasn't like closing your eyes. It was an absolute void. No sound, no color, no form. I felt something I had never felt before. A loneliness beyond any human sadness. And then voices. They started as whispers, then became distant echoes, until they turned into comprehensible words. But what terrified me most was that they were talking about me. She never believed. She always rejected the truth. She thought she knew everything. Fear shot up my spine. Who was saying this? Where was I? My instinct told me to run, but I had nowhere to go. I was floating in a directionless space. And then below me, a scene began to form, as if I were looking through an invisible window. It was the hospital. I saw my own body being rushed through the halls, surrounded by doctors and nurses. A doctor pressed on my chest, trying to revive me. I saw the electrodes being placed on me, the frantic movements of the team. I saw when one of the doctors looked at the clock and said something that chilled me to the bone. Time of death, 23:47. I had died. Those words fell on me like a crushing weight. It was the end of everything. And then, as if something were pulling me away from that scene, I was thrown back into the void. The sensation was worse than anything I had ever experienced. It was like falling without ever hitting the ground. like screaming without anyone hearing. And then, a light. At first, it was a distant point. But as it approached, I felt something shift inside me. The fear began to dissipate, as if that light had the power to strip away all the darkness surrounding me. My heart, if I even had one, tightened. Something told me this wasn't just a light. It was someone. And when I finally saw it, my world changed forever. The light grew. It wasn't like looking at the sun or a bright lamp. It was something alive. I could feel the light as a warmth that didn't burn, like an embrace that enveloped every part of my being. And then he appeared. At first, it was just a silhouette. But as he approached, I knew there was no doubt. It was Jesus. My chest, or whatever I had in that state, tightened. A wave of emotions overwhelmed me. Fear, awe, shame, peace, all at once. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't. He looked at me, and in that instant, I knew he knew everything about me. Not just my life, my choices, my mistakes, but my deepest fears, my hidden pains. He knew the nights I cried alone, the anger I carried in my heart. He knew how much I had rejected the idea that he was real. And yet he loved me. Jesus reached out his hand to me, and the moment he did, everything changed. The dark void disappeared. Suddenly I was in a place that human words could never describe. It was beautiful, but not in an ordinary way. It wasn't like a pretty landscape or a city full of lights. It was a holy beauty, something that made me want to kneel and cry because, for the first time in my life, I felt I was where I always should have been. The peace radiating from that place was something I had never experienced. I saw colors that don't exist on Earth, heard sounds that weren't exactly music but resonated directly in my soul. The very air seemed made of love, grace, something pure and incorruptible. Jesus began to walk and I followed him. Around us, celestial beings appeared. I wouldn't know how to describe them, angels perhaps. Their presence conveyed an indescribable reverence. Some sang, others seemed to simply worship in a way my human mind couldn't comprehend. But as wonderful as all this was, something inside me weighed heavily. I didn't belong there. As incredible as that place was, I felt something was preventing me from being part of it, as if my soul carried a weight that couldn't be taken into that world. Jesus stopped and looked at me again. And it was there, in that moment, that I understood. There was something I needed to know, something that would change everything. And Jesus, with his voice that seemed to carry the very sound of eternity, was about to reveal it to me. Jesus stood before me, looking directly into my eyes. But his gaze wasn't one of judgment or disapproval, it was love. A love so profound that I couldn't bear its weight. My legs, or whatever I had in that state, gave way and I fell to my knees. In that instant, a whirlwind of emotions overwhelmed me. Shame, fear, the certainty that I didn't deserve to be there. But Jesus didn't turn away. He simply smiled. And then, without him needing to move his lips, images began to appear around me. It was as if I were watching my own life, but now from a perspective I had never seen before. I saw my childhood, my mother, so wounded by the pain of abandonment, repeating the phrase that had shaped my entire worldview: men are no good. I saw young Stephany growing up with that idea etched into her heart. I saw the teenager who began to distance herself from anything that reminded her of masculinity, who built walls to protect herself, who chose never to depend on anyone. And then I saw something I had never noticed before. Amid all the pain and rejection, there had been good men around us. I saw the neighbor who, though not close to us, always helped my mother fix things around the house. I saw her boss who allowed her to leave early when I was sick. I saw the teacher who encouraged me to study and told me I was too smart to give up on school. I saw the waiter at the restaurant who always served us with a smile, never treating us with anything less than respect. My heart tightened. Why had I never seen this before? I had always believed that men were no good. But there was the truth. God had always placed good people in our path. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I felt a lump in my throat, but the biggest revelation was yet to come. Jesus stretched out his hand and the scene changed again. This time I saw my father. He was older than in my memories, sitting alone in a chair, staring into nothingness. And then I saw him crying with regret. My mind screamed, "No, he left us. He doesn't deserve my forgiveness." But my heart already knew the truth. I had spent my entire life carrying hatred, pain, and rejection, but none of it had healed my mother. None of it had changed my past. None of it had made me happy. The hatred I felt for him didn't affect him. it affected me. It was then that Jesus spoke. His voice wasn't an ordinary sound, it resonated within me, breaking down every barrier I had built over the years. "Forgive, Stephany." I trembled. My first instinct was to deny it, to say I couldn't. But before I could respond, he continued, "You have been carrying a weight you don't need to carry. I have known you since you were in your mother's womb. I know your pains, your struggles, your fears, but it's time to let this go. Do you want to be free? Then forgive." Tears began to fall. Forgive after everything? But then Jesus stepped closer and everything changed. The pain I felt, the resentment, the anger, it all dissolved in his presence. Jesus showed me what I had never wanted to admit. I hadn't chosen to distance myself from men out of love for women. I had done it out of fear of being hurt like my mother had been hurt. It was a form of protection, of control. If I never let a man get close, I would never risk being hurt. For so many years, I had believed my identity was defined. But now, faced with the truth, everything made sense. It wasn't about desire, it was about fear. Jesus looked at me again and said, something that burned in my soul, "I created you with a purpose. Everything I created has an order, a balance, a plan. Man and woman were created to complement each other, to support each other, to form families. This is part of my design." My mind raced, but Jesus knelt before me and took my hands. For the first time, I truly felt his touch. It was peace. It was love. It was life. "Now, Stephany," he said, "you can choose. You can continue on the path you've always walked, or you can trust me." The choice was mine. The light around him seemed to pulse, as if heaven itself was waiting for my answer. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and when I looked at Jesus again, there was only one thing I wanted to say: I choose to live in Christ. In that instant, I felt something being ripped away from me, as if invisible chains had been broken, as if a weight I had carried my entire life had disappeared. For the first time, I felt true peace. But it wasn't over yet. Jesus smiled and said, "Yeah, then go back. There's something you need to do." Before I could ask what he meant, darkness enveloped me again. Heaven disappeared, and when I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital. The first thing I felt was pain. It was as if I had been ripped from a place where suffering didn't exist and thrown back into a heavy, broken body. My chest burned, my head throbbed, and the sound of machines beeping surrounded me. My eyes hadn't adjusted to the light yet, and everything seemed out of focus. It was only when I tried to take a deep breath that I realized I was alive. It took me a few seconds to understand where I was. I felt the weight of the sheets on me, the smell of disinfectant in the air, the electrodes stuck to my chest. There were voices around me, distant at first, until one became clearer. "She's back. Oh my God, she's back!" A nurse ran out of the room, calling for the doctors. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the halls. I wanted to say something, but my throat felt dry, as if I hadn't spoken in days. And then the weight of reality hit me. I had died. And more than that, I had seen Jesus. The memory came crashing back with overwhelming force. The light, his voice, the truth he had revealed to me. It was all so vivid, so clear, so real. But how could I explain this to anyone? The doctor rushed in, examined me, checked my vitals. He looked at me as if he were seeing a miracle. "Stephany, you gave us a scare. You were dead for 8 minutes. 8 minutes. It felt like an eternity. But I knew something inside me had changed forever. The days that followed were a whirlwind. My mother was called to the hospital. And when she saw me awake, she broke down in tears beside me. I tried to tell her what had happened, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain that Jesus had shown me everything I had never wanted to see? That the hatred I had carried for so many years against my father was destroying me? That my view of my own identity had been rooted in fear, not love? I tried, but no one seemed to understand. "Sweetheart, you hit your head." This could be an effect of the trauma. "You were unconscious. Your brain must have created these images." It was just a dream. But I knew it wasn't a dream. It was real. The more I tried to stay silent, the more it burned inside me. I needed to tell the world what Jesus had shown me. But would anyone believe me? The truth is, I was still trying to understand it all myself. Who was I now? When I was discharged, I realized my life would never be the same. I would have to decide whether to hide this truth forever, or have the courage to speak it. I wasn't the same after that experience. Nothing inside me seemed to fit the way it had before. I looked in the mirror and saw a familiar face. But I knew that inside, everything had changed. But change wasn't easy. In the first few days, I tried to return to my routine, waking up, going to work, talking to the same friends, pretending nothing had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, something inside me screamed. I couldn't look at life the same way anymore. Conversations that used to entertain me now felt empty. Opinions I had defended with such certainty now sounded distant, as if they belonged to someone I no longer was. And the hardest part, the fear of telling people what I had experienced. How could I say that I had died, gone to heaven, seen Jesus, and come back transformed? How could I say that he had shown me truths I had denied my entire life? How could I say that he had given me a choice, and I had chosen to live for him? For a while, I kept it all inside, but the more I stayed silent, the more I felt like I was suffocating. It was like trying to hold fire in my chest. One night, as I tried to sleep, Jesus' words came back to me. Do you want to be free? Then forgive. It was then that I understood. My transformation wouldn't begin until I obeyed what he had asked of me. I needed to forgive my father, and that terrified me. I had spent years convincing myself that he didn't deserve my forgiveness. But what if forgiveness wasn't about deserving? What if forgiveness was about freedom? The next day, I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing. But when I heard my father's voice on the other end, something inside me broke. He was silent when I told him I forgave him. Then I heard a muffled sob. Forgive me, daughter. Forgive me. It was then that I knew God's love hadn't just set me free. It was setting him free too. That was the first step of my new journey. Since then, my life has been a journey of learning and surrender. I began studying the Bible, seeking to understand more about the God who had given me a second chance. The truth had been there all along, but I had never wanted to see it. And now I couldn't deny it anymore. I began to step away from everything that had once been part of my identity because I realized my true identity had always been in Christ. Today, I know that God has a purpose for each of us. He created us with love, gave us a plan, a mission, and the freedom to choose. And I chose Jesus. Before I close, I want to leave you with the verse that marked my transformation. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. Share it, leave a comment, and if you're not already part of this community, subscribe now for more stories that can transform your life. May God bless you.